And we're continuing our message series called The Story. And each week I'm going to check in with you, find out how you're doing. How many of you did your homework assignment and read chapter 2? Let's see those hands. Very good. We're keeping up. Awesome. Awesome stuff. Now, we do have more books available, so if you haven't gotten a book, $5, they'll be at the information center. Heather will be there at the table. And so if you need to pick up a book, get it today. Next week's assignment. Guess what it is? Read chapter 3. Very easy. That'll probably continue on as we go along here in the same manner. So next week, read chapter 3. Now, last week, we discovered that after Adam and Eve sinned, God set into motion a plan to save the world and us from sin. And he would work through mankind to figure out a way that we could be saved from our sins. So the title of the chapter that we read this past week was God Builds a Nation. He builds a nation. And we read in chapter 2 about a bunch of different people: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, Rebecca, Rachel, Lot, and on the list went. But the person I want to focus on this morning is Abraham. Abraham. And as you read throughout the entire Bible, Abraham's name pops up many, many times. In the New Testament alone, Abraham is used about 75 times. Abraham's story becomes central to God's overarching story, that upper story. Abraham's lower story becomes very central to God's upper story. So when Abraham and his wife first come on the scene, Abraham and Sarah first come on the scene, we know them by different names, right? Abraham, his original name is Abram, and Sarah's original name is Sarai. And I think it's interesting, just so you know, mom's Sarai's name means princess, and Sarah's name means queen, or queen of the nations. And that's really interesting, moms, because that's who she was. She would become the mother of all nations down the line. So anyway, let's pick up the story. Abram and Sarai, right at the beginning of God's calling on their lives. Now understand, from Noah to Abram, we have a period of about 1,000 years. Chapter 11 in Genesis goes through all these genealogies, lots of names. There's about 1,000 years that pass between Noah and Abraham. And here we are, we're picking up with the story of Abram. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." Now, I think it's interesting. Wouldn't it be great if God came to you and said, "Here's what I want you to do," and he lays out this plan, just follow me and you're going to do this, and I'm going to bless you and things are going to be great. Wouldn't it be nice if God came to you and talked to you and told you exactly what he wanted you to do? Be nice, wouldn't it? Now, on the other side of that, how many of us would really actually follow through with what he's telling us to do? And I think if you're like me, we'd have some arguments. Think about it, oh, wait, God, I've got a family right now. I've got to take care of them. We've got some things going on. We need to work that out first. Or wait a minute, Lord, don't you think I'm too old? I'm retired. It's not the time now to pack up and go and do this. No way, I've got too much to take care of. Come on, Lord, I've got a job with a boss and a lot of commitments and responsibility in the workplace. Now's not the time. I think most of us would start to come up with these excuses and reasons why not to do what God is calling us to do. But not Abram. Not Abram. In verse 4, what are those first 3 words? So Abram left. He left just as the Lord had told him to. And isn't that interesting? Abram didn't have any questions. He didn't have any reasons not to go. He didn't say, "Lord, but wait." And I wonder oftentimes, how much faith would it have taken for Abram to do that? How much faith would it have taken Abram to just pack up his bags and go? And how many of us could just easily pack up our bags and say, okay, Lord, I'll follow you. Wherever you're going to take me, that's great. Abram didn't argue. He didn't give reasons not to go. He didn't even beg for just a little bit more time to take care of things at home or to take care of things at his workplace. He went. So Abram went. What I want to do this morning is kind of look at the faith that Abram had. The faith that Abram had when it came to his relationship with God. What kind of faith did he have? But first, I got a few issues with Abram. There are a few things about Abram that bother me. And it really comes down to the question, why Abram? What's so special about this guy? Why did God choose Abram? I mean, you look at the promises, the blessings that God made to Abram, and you think, why this guy? Look in verses 2 and 3 in the same chapter. God makes a promise to Abram, and he tells him, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. Man, wouldn't that be awesome? That's good stuff. Why couldn't you come and tell me that, Lord? I don't understand. Why you choose Abram instead of these other people? Then in verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. What a promise God gives to Abram. And then Genesis 15:5. God's talking to Abram. God takes him outside and he says to him, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. I love God's sense of humor. If you can count them. And he says to him, so shall your offspring be. What a promise that, that this man would become the father of many nations. This one man. And again, my question is, why Abram? Why did God choose Abram? I mean, if God came to me and he asked me about Abram, I could think of a lot of reasons why not Abram. Number one, he comes from a family of idol worshipers. Did you know that? Joshua chapter 24. He talks about how Abram's father, Terah, was an idol maker. They made idols for a living. Interesting. Number two, Abram and Sarai, I'm sorry, they're old. It's okay to laugh. They're old. Abram is 75 years old. I mean, he's like retired. It's time to hang it up. It's time to rest. I'm in my golden years. I just want to enjoy time with my grandkids. Oh, wait, what grandkids? Number three, they're infertile. They can't have kids, and God's blessing them, and he's going to create this nation through Abram, but they can't have kids. They're 75 years, he's 75 years old. They can't have kids. Number four, Abram's a liar. I know it didn't come out as you're reading the story. There's selected passages out of the Bible, so it didn't come out in the story last week in chapter 2, but if you read the Bible and the Genesis account, they go from town to town, Abram and Sarai do. And in each town, Abram tells Sarai to tell everybody that she is his sister, so they don't kill him. Abram is a liar, all right? So you want reasons why not Abram? I got them. Very easy. I could easily disqualify this guy, all right? Wouldn't it be better, Lord, if you chose someone who was younger? Little well-dressed. One of these young urban professionals who know what they're doing and got their lives all together. I mean, come on, Lord, what are you thinking here? I got a lot of reasons why not Abram. But as you read the story, and you're going to learn this as we go on throughout this series, is that God doesn't use the young urban professional. He doesn't use these people who have it all together. He doesn't use the attractive or the strong or the successful. Take a look at some of the people that he uses, all right? Abraham, he was old. Isaac, insecure. Leah, ugly. Joseph was a slave. Moses stuttered. Gideon, fearful. Samson, he was proud. Rahab was a prostitute. David had an affair. Elijah was suicidal. Jeremiah, depressed. I mean, read the book of Lamentations. Very depressing. Jonah was disobedient. Naomi was a widow. Mary was a poor teenage girl. John the Baptist, one word for you: eccentric. All right? The dude was weird, all right? So Peter, he was impulsive. Martha worried a lot. The Samaritan woman, she had several failed marriages. Thomas had his doubts. Paul was in poor health. And Timothy was timid. We've got this whole list of people that you wouldn't expect God to use. And it's not whom we would choose. It's not the people that we would sit in a boardroom and say, yeah, I want this guy to take care of it. It's the most unlikely candidates that God uses to write his story sometimes. Could God be using you right now? Maybe you feel like it's too late, you know? Maybe you feel like you're too old, or you've made too many mistakes, or you're a nobody, or you don't have any talents, or you don't have a lot of money or resources. Take a look at Abram and Sarai. You want reasons why not? They had them. But God took two of the most unlikely candidates, and he turned them into people that could write his story. And if God can use these two elderly, infertile, idol-worshiping people, then God can use you. It is so true. Tell that to your neighbor. Say, God can use you. Go ahead, tell that to your neighbor. God can use you. It's awesome. So God comes to Abram and he tells him, pack up everything you have and follow me, and I'm going to take you to a land that I will show you. And Abram leaves. He goes. And again, I wonder, how much faith would that take? And when you look at Abraham's story, it can be summed up in that one word: faith. Faith. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. So through the story of Abraham, write this in your notes, we learn that faith is obeying God even when you don't know where he's leading you. Even though you don't know where you're going, even though you have no idea where God is taking you, it's obeying him no matter what. And you look at Abram at this point in his life, the questions aren't all answered. You know, he doesn't have a set of blueprints. There's no trip itinerary. It's not like he can log on to MapQuest and say, okay, Lord, where are we going? You know, he doesn't even have a map. But Abraham obeys God and he takes action. And I wonder how many of us are sitting around the house, sitting on our couches, sitting somewhere, and waiting for God to give us a sign. Waiting for God to speak to us or to show us something. And we're just sitting there, and all the time we know God has given us something to do, and we're just not obeying it. What's God calling you to do? What is it that he wants you to do? A lot of it's written pretty clearly in his story, the Bible. We could start there. What does he want us to do? I know you get little nudges from him from time to time. He nudges you and say, hey, I need you to do this. Why don't you obey? What is it that's keeping you sitting there? What's holding you back? Faith is obeying God, even though you don't know how it's all going to work out. Even though you don't know where he's leading you. Are you willing to obey? As we keep reading the story of Abraham, God tells Abraham that he would build this nation through him. Despite his age, despite his infertility, despite his lying, despite all this other stuff. And we look at Abraham's response. In Genesis 15:6, Abraham did what? Come on. Abraham did what? He believed. He believed the Lord. How simple is that? Abram believed the Lord. He just believed God despite the circumstances. He believed that God would do what he said he would do. Plain and simple. I love Paul's description about Abraham in Romans chapter 4. He says this, against all hope, Abraham in hope believed and so became the father of many nations. Verse 19, without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Yet he didn't waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God. He didn't waver. What's it take for you to waver in your faith? For some of us, it's not very much. Abraham didn't waver, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. Write this in your notes. Faith is believing in God even when all hope is gone. It's believing in God even when all hope is gone. And so much of your story is going to come down to one answer to one very simple question. You might want to write this in your notes. Here's the question. Do I believe God? Do I really believe God? And how you answer that question has the potential to radically change the outcome of your story. Do I really believe God? The answer to that question is going to impact on how you act on everyday life. Do I really believe God? And then it's going to come through trying and testing. You don't get the job you applied for. Do I believe God? You don't get into the school that you wanted to get into. Do I really believe God? You get bad news about your health from the doctor. Do I really believe God? Do you believe that God will come through and still work for the good of all things? Do I really believe God? Kind of a sidebar here, and I want you to understand that believing and having faith in God is not believing that God will do whatever I want him to do. He's not this magic lamp you rub and he pops out and gives you 3 wishes. Having faith in God, I think we get this confused. We think that faith is believing that God's going to do what I want him to do, and if I just believe enough. How many times have you said, well, I just got to have more faith? I got to believe a little harder. If I have this strong faith, then God will come through. That's not faith. Biblical faith is believing that God will do what he said he was going to do, and believing that God will do whatever he wants to do. That's biblical faith, and Abraham models that for us here. He believes in God even when all hope is gone. He believes God's word will come true. But then comes chapter 16, Genesis, right? Abraham and Sarah, they believe that God's going to do what he said he would do, but they start to think that God's timing is a little slow. Ever think that? You got a problem or you're dealing with an issue and you think, okay, God, when are you going to resolve this for me? Come on. And, let's make this happen like right now. So Abraham and Sarah do most times what we do. We take matters into our own hands, right? We try to take care of it ourselves. Genesis 16:2. Sarai comes to Abram, and here it is, verse 2. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Who do we blame when things go wrong in our lives? It's God's fault. Sarai was no different. It's God's fault. The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said, like he's going to say no. It was pretty common back then for men to do that, to build families through their, nowadays, I don't recommend it, okay, men? All right. All right, so Abram goes and tries to build the family through Hagar. She conceives. Sarah gets jealous. She starts to become bitter toward her maidservant Hagar. So she has Abram send her out into the wilderness, basically to die. And all these problems arise because Abraham and Sarah, they get ahead of God in his will and his plan. They're committed to God's destination, like all of us are. We want to get where God's taking us, but the problem is sometimes we don't necessarily look for God's direction and how to get there. We want to do it on our own. And that's what happens with Abraham and Sarah. Hagar gives birth to a son named Ishmael. Later, Abraham and Sarah would have their own son named Isaac. Ishmael becomes the father of the Arab nations. Isaac becomes the father of the Jewish and Christian nations. And what you have now, 4,000 years later, is still a conflict. You turn on the news, you read the newspaper, and you see what's going on between Israel and Iran. Guess who those families are? Isaac and Ishmael. And you read in the story this past week how God said he would build a nation through Ishmael, and they would become a great nation, and they would be in conflict with their brother Isaac. We see it today. We know the Muslim nation also traces itself to Ishmael. Who are we in conflict as Christians with? The Islam religion. When you try to take matters into your own hands and not follow God's plan and direction for your life, problems arise, as evidenced by Abraham and Sarah in their decisions. There doesn't seem to be any reward for trying to solve problems without God's help. So what do? Keep believing in God, even when it seems to not be in your timing, even when it seems like he's taking his time. So the height of Abraham's story comes in Genesis chapter 22. We don't understand why God would ask this. Here, God comes to Abraham, and he tells him, I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac, and sacrifice him on an altar. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, God told Abraham that a great nation would come from him. And now God is asking Abraham to take his son on a 3-day journey to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there on an altar. And you can see Abraham scratching his head. Why would God do this? Why? Maybe you can't see that because in Genesis 22, chapter 22, verse 3, Abraham wakes up early the next morning. He gets all his stuff together. He heads out with his son Isaac and a couple of his servants on a donkey. And they go to the region of Moriah, and look what happens in verse 5, Genesis 22. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Did you catch it? We will worship, and we will come back to you. Do you hear Abraham's faith? Maybe take your Bibles and circle that word we, the second we. We will worship and we will come back to you. Abraham didn't say to his servants, we'll go over there and worship and then I will come back to you. He has some kind of faith that God's going to bring his son back. We will come back, not I will come back. He knew that God would keep his promise and that God would be faithful. And here's faith. Write this down. Faith is trusting God even when the story doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make sense, Lord. Why would you have me sacrifice my son? You're going to build a nation through me and through this son, and I don't understand why you want me to kill him. It doesn't make sense. Even though it doesn't make sense, though, Abraham takes Isaac, They climbed this mountain in the region of Moriah to the place of sacrifice. In Genesis 22:6, here we go. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where's the lamb for the offering, the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. Can you hear the silence? Just walking along. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand. He took the knife to try to slay his son, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. You could probably see the blood rush back to his face and a sigh of relief, like, what in the world? "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Did you catch that? You have not withheld from me. We read it as an angel of the Lord. You know who this is? Jesus Christ. He tells Abraham, you haven't withheld him from me. Jesus is looking on. Verse 13, Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." The Lord will provide. Isaac grows up. He marries Rebekah. They have twin boys named Jacob and Esau. It takes them a while, 20 years, to have Jacob and Esau. Seems like God is a little slow in building this nation of his, right? But Jacob grows up. He has 12 sons that would become the 12 tribes of Israel. And God's nation building is finally underway. It seems like it's actually going somewhere now. But here's what I want you to understand this morning. What happened here on the mountain of Moriah is just a piece of the bigger picture. We see this 6-foot level lower story of humankind, but there's an upper story that's being worked out here. God's upper story comes into play. It's in the story of Abraham and Isaac. We see a little bit of this foreshadowing of God's upper story. And I've shared this with you before. I'll share it again. In the very place that God provided the ram as a substitute for Jesus, or for Isaac, God provided his son as a substitute for the entire world. The very same place where Jesus came to Abraham and said, you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Jesus would then, 2,000 years later, come and die in that very spot. The only Son of God. He became a substitute for the entire world. How many of you like puzzles? I like puzzles. I like to put together puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, you know. Have you ever worked on a puzzle and you get down, there's just a few pieces left, and you get them in place, and you look and you go, where's the last piece? And you're working on this puzzle and you're going, I know it's got to be around here somewhere. And you're frustrated, You can see what the picture is, you know what it is, but what's noticeable? The missing piece. So you turn the house over, you're looking in the cushions and in the washing machines. You're like, I got to find this place, man. I got to find this piece. It's got to be around here somewhere. Ask your child. That's what we do, right? Our kids took it. They're hiding it. It's got to be somewhere. The missing piece. Is it possible that you're the missing piece in God's story? And God's looking for you. He's searching everywhere. He's asking his kids, trust me, where's so-and-so? We were made to play a part in God's story, and we're going to find that out as we go along here. We're made to play a part in His story, and we're going to try to figure out what that is. How can we write our story to match His story? We're made to play a part of His story, but some of you are holding back. What's keeping you from playing a part in His story? Is it your age? Infertility? Illness? Lies? Your job? Responsibilities? Or maybe it could be summed up in this one word: faith. Faith. You see, God chose Abraham not because he was qualified or not because he deserved it. God chose Abraham because he had faith. On this day, God's calling you, every single one of you in this room. You're here for a reason, and God is calling out to you. And it's not because you deserve it, and it's not because you're qualified, but it's because you've got faith. And God's going to use you because you've put your faith and trust in Him. Will you let God use you to write His story?